The moment that changed everything began with a mistake so small it should have vanished into the noise of the universe. One wrong step. One chair taken without looking twice. And suddenly, the fate of more than one civilization tilted. The Concord Nexus was designed to make people feel insignificant. Vast glass arcs curved into infinity, stars sliding past like uninterested witnesses. The air carried a carefully engineered calm, neutral sense, neutral light, neutral gravity, meant to soothe species that had once tried to exterminate each other over less polite disagreements. For Elias Wren, junior attaché to a delegation nobody bothered to remember, the station did its job a little too well. He felt small. Replaceable. Exactly as instructed. His assignment was simple: follow the path, sit where the lights told him to, and do nothing worth recording. He wore a regulation suit rated safe for 47 known biologies and uncomfortable for all of them. His datapad flickered with seating confirmations, each position numbered and meaningless. He counted as he walked, grounding himself in routine. 14. 15. 16. He sat. The chair adjusted smoothly beneath him, molding to his posture, humming its approval. Elias exhaled. No tripping. No protocol breach. No interstellar incident caused by a human misplacing a limb. Then he noticed the seat beside him. It wasn't a chair. It was an absence shaped like authority. Taller than the rest, forged from pale alloy that caught the light and bent it strangely, etched with symbols that refused to settle when stared at directly. It radiated expectation. The kind that made the air feel heavier. Elias froze. His datapad dimmed, then shut itself off as if declining involvement. Around the chamber, delegations arrived. Fields shimmered. Limbs unfolded. Languages overlapped and resolved into the station's neutral translation hum. The throne beside him remained empty, and somehow that made it worse. When the Queen entered, the room adjusted. Not mechanically. Instinctively. She moved with the quiet certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed without demanding it. At a distance, she might have passed for human, same symmetry, same upright grace, but the illusion fractured up close. Her features were too precise, her movements too economical, her presence too heavy to ignore. This was someone shaped by centuries of expectation. She approached the throne. Elias's instinct screamed. Stand. Apologize. Disappear. He shifted forward, hands pressing against the armrests. A hand closed around his. Cool. Steady. Unyielding. The contact short-circuited every thought he had. He looked up, pulse roaring in his ears. The Queen did not look at him. Her gaze stayed forward, fixed on the watching council, as though this were the most natural thing in the universe. A pressure brushed his hearing, not sound but intention carried through a private field. Do not move. Stay. Elias swallowed. Every protocol he had ever studied dissolved into static. He nodded once because nodding felt safer than breathing. The council settled. The throne remained technically unoccupied, but the illusion had changed. From a distance, two figures now occupied the space beside it. Continuity. Stability. Strength. Negotiations began. Elias listened to voices layered with threat and courtesy, translated into pleasant neutrality. He understood little and felt everything. Each time a delegate pressed too hard, the Queen's grip tightened. Each time tension eased, it loosened. His arm tingled, then went numb, then transcended sensation entirely. Time stretched. Not minutes or hours, endurance. He learned the room through her reactions. The subtle shift of her fingers when someone implied weakness. The near imperceptible tension in her wrist when the empty throne was referenced without being named. He learned that power did not announce itself. It waited. At one point, his stomach betrayed him with a quiet protest. If you lose consciousness, the Queen transmitted calmly, history will be unkind. I will remain upright out of spite, he sent back. For the briefest moment, her grip warmed. Holograms bloomed in the chamber's heart, borders, trade routes, disputed systems rotating in soft light. Elias leaned forward without thinking. So. He froze again, face burning, posture rigid. The Queen's patience held. As arguments escalated, so did the cruelty. One faction spoke of balance while carefully circling loss. Another implied that grief made leadership predictable. They never gestured to the throne, but everyone felt it. Elias felt something unfamiliar ignite behind his ribs. Anger. Not righteous. Not strategic. Personal. He did not understand treaties or ancient clauses, but he understood predation. He had seen it in offices and boardrooms, wrapped in polite language. Scaled up, it looked the same. When a particularly venomous implication landed, the Queen's hand trembled. Without thinking, Elias adjusted his grip. Not tighter. Steadier. The movement was small. Invisible to the chamber. Everything to her. Her breathing slowed. She spoke then. Her voice carried without force, dismantling the argument with precision that bordered on artistry. She referenced history, precedent, forgotten agreements buried so deep only someone who had lived them would remember. The hologram shifted in response. Lines changed color. Data aligned. Silence followed. Elias stared forward, fighting a grin. He had just watched someone win a battle using grammar. As the session dragged on, the council's attention drifted. Not to the throne. To him. Side glances. Assessments. The kind reserved for unexpected variables. You may relax, the queen said. They are trying to decide if you matter. I promise I do not, Elias replied earnestly. She considered that. At the moment you do. Exhaustion set in, thick and heavy. The nutrient fields provided sustenance that tasted like citrus-flavored regret. Elias accepted it gratefully anyway. Then came the final speaker. They rose slowly, voice gentle, almost kind. They praised progress. Commended restraint. And then, with surgical precision, invoked the absent consort directly. The chamber reacted as one. Elias's hand was crushed in the queen's grip. Pain flared, sharp enough to clear his head completely. There was no protocol for this. No guidance. No safety rail. So he leaned closer. He didn't speak. Didn't look at the speaker. He simply reduced the space between them, shoulders nearly touching, his presence unmistakable. His hand shifted again, not passive now but answering. Holding back. The pressure eased. The queen lifted her head. What followed was not anger. Not grief. Certainty. She acknowledged the loss without apology. Reframed it without surrender. Defined strength as endurance rather than immunity. As she spoke, the treaty text stabilized, clauses locking into place, the system recognizing finality. The speaker sat. The chamber exhaled. A harmonic tone resonated through the floor, the sound of agreement sealed. Elias felt it vibrate through his bones. He was smiling. The queen did not release his hand. As delegates began to rise, gathering devices and retracting fields, Elias felt the weight of what he had survived crash into him all at once. His legs trembled. His spine protested. Adrenaline drained away, leaving awe in its wake. Are you going to stand? She asked quietly. I was waiting to be told, he replied. Her grip loosened. You may. He rose carefully, the universe swaying just enough to remind him how close he had come to falling, into history, into something irreversible. The chamber emptied, leaving light, glass, and stars drifting past in indifferent beauty. Elias turned toward the queen, finally able to look at her without the weight of 1,000 eyes. She looked tired, relieved, and unmistakably alone. Thank you, she said. Before Elias could answer, the station chimed again, an alert sharp enough to cut through the calm. Systems flickered. The stars beyond the glass dimmed as emergency overlays bloomed to life. The treaty had held. Something else had not. And every instinct Elias had told him that staying seated had been the easy part. The alarms did not scream. They whispered. That was how Elias knew this wasn't a drill. The Concord nexus shifted into a different kind of silence, one that felt deliberate rather than ceremonial. Light along the curved walls dimmed by a fraction, stars beyond the glass overlaid with faint tactical grids. The station wasn't panicking. It was preparing. And whatever it was preparing for had slipped past layers of prediction that rarely failed. Elias steadied himself, instincts finally catching up with reality. Around him, the council chamber was nearly empty now, vast and echoing, stripped of the tension that had held it together moments before. The queen stood motionless, eyes fixed on the glowing overlays bleeding through the transparent arc of the station's hull. She did not ask a question. She did not need to. A discreet panel slid open near the far wall, and a senior systems aide stepped through, posture rigid with the kind of control learned from surviving too many emergencies. Their eyes flicked to Elias, then away, recalibrating assumptions on the fly. Containment failure in the outer diplomatic ring, the aide reported. Not structural. Informational. Elias frowned. Informational failures were worse. Hull breaches could be sealed. Fires extinguished. Information once loose developed momentum. The queen's gaze sharpened. Source. Unknown, the aide replied. But it propagated immediately after treaty confirmation. Too fast to be coincidence. Elias felt the weight of that land. The treaty had stabilized the region, yes, but it had also shifted power. And whenever power moved, someone tried to follow the turbulence. The queen turned to him, then really turned, studying him without performance for the first time since the alarms began. Her expression held calculation, not doubt. "You should leave the chamber," she said calmly. "Protocol requires." "I'm not protocol," Elias interrupted before fear could stop him. The aide inhaled sharply. The queen did not correct him. Instead, she regarded him for a long heartbeat, then inclined her head by the smallest margin. "No," she said. "You are not." Another chime rippled through the station, this one closer, sharper. The overlays intensified, resolving into streams of symbols Elias did not recognize but instinctively disliked. They crawled along the glass like luminous parasites. The aide's voice tightened. "Someone is injecting narrative packets into the public channels. Fabricated interpretations of the treaty. Revisions. Emotional triggers keyed to multiple species cultural fault lines. Disinformation," Elias translated quietly. "Weaponized?" "Yes." The queen exhaled slowly. "So soon?" Elias's thoughts raced. He had spent years in administrative trenches where truth rarely lost outright but was often buried under louder versions of itself. Scale that up to a galactic audience and the damage would be incalculable. "Who benefits?" he asked. The aide hesitated. That was answer enough. The queen moved decisively now, crossing the chamber toward the observation arc. Elias followed without thinking, his earlier exhaustion forgotten. Outside, the stars were partially obscured by data flows, civilian networks, trade relays, cultural feeds, all lighting up as false narratives spread. "This is not an attack meant to destroy the treaty," the queen said quietly. "It's meant to make it unbearable to uphold." Elias swallowed. If enough populations believed they'd been betrayed, pressure would mount. Retaliation would follow. The treaty would collapse not from violation but from outrage. "Can it be stopped?" he asked. The aide nodded once. "But not from here. The source is inside the nexus. Someone with clearance high enough to seed every channel simultaneously." Elias's pulse spiked. Inside meant close. Trusted. The queen's gaze flicked to him again, sharp and assessing. Elias felt suddenly, acutely aware of himself, of how out of place he should have been, how little authority he actually held. "And yet, you understand narrative flow," she said. It wasn't a question. Elias hesitated only a fraction of a second. "Enough to be honest. I understand how people decide what to believe when they're afraid." The queen turned fully toward him. The station lights caught the fine lines of strain around her eyes, the remnants of hours spent holding the weight of peace without flinching. "Then you will come with me," she said. The aide stiffened. "Majesty." "He has already been seen," the queen cut in. Removing him now would create its own story. Elias felt a cold clarity settle over him. He had crossed a threshold he could not see behind anymore. They moved quickly through corridors now alive with controlled urgency. Security fields slid aside at the queen's approach. Personnel stepped back, eyes flicking between her and the human walking at her shoulder, curiosity battling caution. As they passed a transparent junction, Elias caught a glimpse of a crowd forming beyond the barriers, delegates, aides, media proxies. Screens hovered, already replaying fragments of altered footage, captions blooming with emotionally loaded interpretations. "It's spreading faster than fact," Elias muttered. "Fear travels at the speed of imagination," the queen replied. They reached a secure lift, its interior lined with muted light and privacy fields. As it descended, the hum of the station faded, replaced by a heavy quiet. The queen watched the numbers tick down, then spoke softly. "You should know something. What is happening now was anticipated. Not in detail but in inevitability." Elias turned to her. "Anticipated?" She nodded. "There are factions who profit from instability. Peace threatens them. They were waiting for the moment when restraint looked like weakness. And they think they can use grief again," Elias realized. "Yes." The lift slowed. Elias's mind raced ahead, assembling possibilities. Counter-narratives. Symbolic gestures. Public moments that reframed the story before it hardened. "They don't just need facts," he said. "They need something that feels true enough to compete with fear." The queen regarded him steadily. "And what would that be?" Elias hesitated, then spoke the thought that had been forming since the chamber. "They need to see you not as untouchable but as present. Not alone on a throne but connected." The lift doors slid open. Beyond lay the Nexus's communication core, a cathedral of light and data, where information converged before radiating outward to 1,000 worlds. Operators turned as the queen entered, surprise rippling through them. She did not go to the central dais. She stopped instead, turning to Elias. "You are suggesting visibility," she said. "I'm suggesting humanity," he replied quietly. "Not just mine." Yours. The room stilled. Every operator froze, listening. The Queen studied him, searching for something, recklessness, perhaps, or ambition. She found neither. Very well, she said at last. She stepped onto the dais and gestured for him to join her. Elias's heart slammed against his ribs. This was no longer about staying seated. This was about standing where he absolutely did not belong. As he moved beside her, screens around the chamber flared to life, feeds stabilizing, millions of eyes suddenly focused on this unexpected pairing. The Queen raised a hand. Silence rippled outward. Elias felt the weight of it pressed down, heavier than any protocol manual, heavier even than the throne had been. She began to speak. And somewhere deep in the nexus, unseen by all of them, a hidden system finished compiling its final packet. One designed not to twist the truth, but to erase the choice to hear it at all. The lights flickered. Elias felt the air shift. And for the first time since this began, the Queen's hand found his again, not to steady herself but to warn him. The blackout lasted less than a second. That was long enough. Every screen in the communication core went dark at once, not flickering, not failing, simply gone. The hum of the nexus dropped into a silence so complete it felt like pressure on the ears. Elias's first instinct was physical, not political. The way the Queen's fingers tightened around his told him this was worse than misinformation. This was erasure. Emergency light strips flared to life along the floor and ceiling, bathing the chamber in low amber. Operators froze at their stations, hands hovering uselessly over interfaces that no longer responded. Somewhere deep in the station, systems were being told, very politely, to forget how to speak. Then the feeds came back. Not the Nexus feeds. Something else. Every surface became a mirror of the same image. A fractured emblem Elias didn't recognize, rotating slowly against a field of static stars. Beneath it, a cascade of translated text bloomed simultaneously in hundreds of languages, tuned with surgical precision to cultural fault lines, historical wounds, and half-remembered fears. Elias read 3 lines and felt his stomach drop. This wasn't persuasion. It wasn't propaganda. It was a verdict. They are declaring the treaty illegitimate, he said quietly. And they're doing it as if it's already been accepted. The Queen's expression did not change, but her grip shifted, no longer warning, now bracing. Whoever this is, she said, they are not trying to win an argument. They are trying to end the conversation. An operator found their voice. Majesty, our outbound channels are locked. We can't counter-broadcast. Elias scanned the room, mind racing. The attackers had done their homework. By seizing narrative control at the moment of maximum visibility, they had created a reality where response looked like denial, and denial looked like guilt. People believe what arrives first, he muttered. Especially when it arrives everywhere. The emblem on the screens pulsed. New text appeared, sharper, more direct. It reframed the Queen's silence during the blackout as evidence. It implied manipulation, concealment, orchestration. Elias felt heat flare in his chest. They're using your restraint against you. The Queen inclined her head slightly. As expected. Another operator spoke, voice tight. We're receiving internal pings. Civilian networks are already reacting. Protests forming in at least 12 systems. Trade hubs are freezing activity pending clarification. Pending clarification we can't give, Elias finished. The Queen turned toward the dais again, gaze lifting to the hostile emblem hanging over them like a challenge. She could speak, yes, but into what? A locked room. A sealed channel. Words without reach. Unless, Elias thought, reach wasn't the point. He tugged gently at her hand, just enough to draw her attention. She looked at him, and for the first time since the crisis began, uncertainty flickered. Not fear, but calculation pushed to its edge. They're trying to define reality for everyone at once, Elias said. But reality doesn't propagate evenly. It anchors where people already trust. The Queen's eyes narrowed. Go on. You don't need to outshout them everywhere, he continued. You need to be undeniable somewhere. A single point strong enough that it fractures their certainty. One of the operators scoffed softly. With respect, human, they've locked the nexus itself. Elias met their gaze. They've locked the infrastructure. Not the witnesses. The Queen studied him, then glanced around the chamber, at the operators, the aides, the security personnel, the people who had just watched her hold a treaty together with silence and will. Witnesses, she repeated. She released his hand. The absence startled him more now than it had earlier. She stepped forward, voice carrying without amplification. All personnel prepare for manual relay. Activate personal recording arrays. Use independent buffers only. A ripple of shock ran through the room. Majesty, an aide protested, that violates. Let them see, the Queen said calmly. Let them see everything. Elias's pulse spiked. This was dangerous. Personal recordings meant uncontrolled angles, imperfect context, emotion bleeding through the cracks. It was the opposite of curated messaging. It was also honest. The emblem on the screens pulsed again as if sensing resistance. Text sharpened, language escalating, calling for immediate withdrawal from the treaty, framing compliance as complicity. The Queen turned to Elias one last time. You will speak first. His mouth went dry. Me. They know how to doubt me, she said. They do not yet know how to doubt you. Before he could object, she stepped back, giving him the space she had denied him all day. Every eye in the chamber turned toward him. Elias felt the weight of it slam into place. He had no title worth mentioning, no authority to stand on. All he had was presence, and the memory of hours spent holding the line without speaking. He stepped forward. The emergency lights cast his shadow long and distorted across the floor. He raised his hands slowly, not in command but in acknowledgement. I don't represent a government, he began, voice steady despite the chaos pounding behind his ribs. I don't represent a species consensus or a strategic bloc. The emblem flickered, text stuttering for the first time. I represent what happens when you sit in the wrong place and decide not to leave. A murmur rippled through the room. Operators' recording lights blinked active, tiny red points blooming like stars. I watched this treaty get built the hard way, Elias continued. Not with threats or leverage but with patience. With silence. With the kind of restraint that doesn't make good headlines. The emblem pulsed harder now, static bleeding into the image. They're telling you this was manipulation, Elias said, gaze fixed on the hostile symbol as if it could see him. That you were fooled. That grief was used as a weapon. He shook his head once. I was there. Close enough to feel every moment when pressure could have broken something, and didn't. The screens flickered. The Queen stood behind him now, not looming, not distant. Simply present. You don't have to trust me, Elias said. But if you're going to doubt something, doubt this. That piece is fragile because it's weak. His voice tightened, anger bleeding through at last. Peace is fragile because it requires people to stay when leaving would be easier. The emblem shattered. Not exploded, fractured, breaking into recursive patterns, the text scrambling as if the system generating it had lost its footing. Across the room, operators gasped as independent buffers lit up, packets slipping through gaps the attackers hadn't sealed. We're getting bleed through, someone shouted. Civilian nodes are picking this up. The Queen stepped forward beside Elias, her voice joining his, not overpowering but reinforcing. This treaty stands, she said, not because it is perfect but because it was witnessed. Because it was held. Because it was earned. The feed surged. For a heartbeat it felt like they had done it. Then every light in the chamber flared white. Elias staggered as a new force slammed into the nexus, not informational this time but physical. The floor trembled, a deep, resonant shudder rolling through the station's frame. External mass displacement detected, an operator yelled. Something just exited concealment range. The Queen's head snapped up toward the glass arc. Beyond it, space warped. And a silhouette began to emerge, vast, deliberate, unmistakably hostile. Elias felt the Queen's hand close around his again. Whatever had just been unleashed, it wasn't here to argue. The thing outside the glass was not arriving. It was already there, and reality was just now admitting it. Space around the nexus folded inward, light bending as if ashamed to travel straight in its presence. The silhouette resolved slowly, deliberately, like a thought forming in a hostile mind. Elias had seen holoprojections of dreadnoughts before. This was not that. This was asymmetry given mass. A structure grown rather than built, vast plates overlapping like scars, its surface drinking starlight instead of reflecting it. The station shuddered again, deeper this time, a vibration that crawled up through Elias's boots and into his teeth. External object classified as non-allied, a systems officer reported, voice taut. No active weapon signatures. No propulsion trace. Which meant it had not flown here. It had appeared. The Queen did not step back. Her posture remained upright, controlled, but Elias felt the tension in her grip, not fear but recognition. This was not a surprise to her in the way it was to everyone else. This is escalation, Elias said quietly, more to anchor himself than to inform. Yes, she replied. They have moved from persuasion to inevitability. Around them, emergency protocols cascaded. Bulkheads sealed. Defensive fields spun up with a low, anxious hum. The Nexus was powerful, but it was not a war station. It was a place built on the assumption that violence was the least efficient option. The silhouette outside shifted, and with it, something worse than weapons fire reached the station. A signal. Not sound. Not language. A pressure that brushed the edges of thought, carrying intent without words. Several operators cried out, clutching their heads. One collapsed, systems flickering wildly as their interface overloaded. Cognitive intrusion detected, someone shouted. It's not hacking the network. It's bypassing it. Elias felt it too, a cold weight pressing against his awareness, probing, cataloging. It slid past fear, past logic, searching for leverage. His mind flashed with images that were not his own. Protests turning violent. Trade routes collapsing. Worlds choosing sides. The treaty dissolving into a footnote of regret. They're showing us outcomes, he realized. Not threats. Predictions. The Queen's fingers tightened once, grounding him. She was resisting the intrusion with sheer discipline, her thoughts locked behind layers of training and grief-hardened will. They want us to choose surrender before conflict, she said. To make resistance feel irresponsible. As if summoned by her words, the hostile feed surged again. The fractured emblem reassembled on auxiliary displays, now accompanied by projections of the looming structure outside. The narrative shifted seamlessly. This entity as enforcer, as guarantor, as the price of stability. Elias felt anger flare hot and sharp. They're reframing coercion as protection. Yes, the Queen said. And they are very good at it. Another tremor rolled through the station. The silhouette extended structures that might have been antennae or might have been something worse. The cognitive pressure intensified. Several operators faltered. One dropped to their knees, whispering that maybe compliance was safer, that maybe peace imposed was better than chaos chosen. Elias stepped forward before he could overthink it. He positioned himself where the pressure felt strongest, closer to the glass, closer to the thing that was trying to decide the future for them. The Queen's attention snapped to him, sharp. This time she did not stop him. The pressure hit him full force. His vision blurred. The station seemed to stretch like a memory pulled too thin. The intrusive signal surged, flooding him with scenarios tailored to him personally. A quiet life reclaimed if he stayed silent. Anonymity restored. Survival without consequence. He understood then. This was not a single message. It was a mirror reflecting back whatever would break you fastest. Elias laughed. It surprised him as much as anyone. The pressure hesitated. It doesn't know what to do with me, he thought, clarity cutting through the fog. I'm not important enough to threaten properly. He reached back without looking, felt the Queen's hand close around his again. Not restraint this time. Partnership. The thing outside adjusted. The signal sharpened, abandoning subtlety. The projections grew darker, outcomes more catastrophic, insisting that resistance led only to annihilation. Elias focused on the physical world. On the feel of the floor vibrating. On the steady presence beside him. On the memory of sitting still when every instinct had screamed to run. It's lying by omission, he said aloud, voice carrying through the chamber. It's showing futures without showing the cost of obedience. The Queen understood immediately. She turned to the operators still standing, voice calm and commanding despite the pressure pressing in on all of them. Open internal channels, she directed. All of them. No filters. Majesty, someone protested weakly, that will amplify the intrusion. Good, she replied. Let it hear us too. The channels opened. The station filled with noise. Fear, determination, confusion, defiance. 1,000 uncoordinated thoughts bleeding together. It was chaotic, imperfect, alive. The silhouette outside reacted. The pressure wavered, then spiked as if offended. Elias felt it recoil from the messiness of genuine choice, from the refusal to collapse into a single predictable outcome. It doesn't like variables, he realized. It prefers systems that behave. He squeezed the Queen's hand once, then stepped fully into the open. You want inevitability, he said, directing the thought outward, letting it ride the open channels. But you're dealing with people who make mistakes and then refuse to correct them. The cognitive pressure surged violently, slamming into him. His knees buckled, but he stayed upright, supported by the Queen's grip. Around them, the nexus groaned as power systems strained. Defensive fields flared brighter, then dimmed. External energy spike, a systems officer shouted. Is charging something. The silhouette outside began to glow from within, veins of cold light tracing along its surface. Whatever it was preparing, it was not symbolic. The Queen moved then decisively. She stepped in front of Elias, placing herself between him and the glass, her presence like a shield. Enough, she said, voice resonant, carrying not just authority but resolve. You will not decide our future for us. The entity responded. Not with words. With motion. Space rippled violently as the structure shifted position, aligning itself directly with the Nexus's core. The station screamed in protest, alarms finally abandoning restraint as red light flooded the corridors. Impact trajectory locked, an operator yelled. It's not firing. It's moving. Elias's blood ran cold. It wasn't attacking. It was docking. If it merged with the Nexus, if it embedded itself into the heart of interstellar communication, it wouldn't need weapons. It would become the filter through which reality itself was negotiated. The Queen's mind raced visibly now, calculations stacking behind her eyes. She looked at Elias, something unspoken passing between them. If it connects, he said, it controls the story forever. Yes, she agreed. And we lose the ability to choose badly. The docking vector tightened. The silhouette loomed impossibly close now, filling the glass with darkness and cold light. A final system alert blared. Manual intervention required. The Queen turned toward the central control spire, then back to Elias. Her grip tightened, not in fear but in decision. There is one way to stop it, she said. Elias did not ask what it was. He saw it in her eyes. And for the first time since he had taken the wrong seat, he understood that staying might finally cost more than standing ever could. The first thing Elias understood was that the Queen's plan did not include survival as a requirement. The second was that she had already decided he would be part of it. The Nexus screamed as the docking shadow eclipsed the stars. Emergency gravity surged, then stuttered, throwing sparks of light across the chamber as stabilizers fought to keep reality in a single orientation. The hostile structure loomed impossibly close now, its surface resolving into layers of interlocking systems. Interfaces designed not for ships but for civilizations. It wasn't invading space. It was invading relevance. The Queen released Elias's hand and stepped toward the control spire at the center of the chamber. The spire flared to life, recognizing her authority instantly, projecting dense lattices of command pathways and failsafes meant for scenarios no one ever expected to use. There is a manual severance protocol, she said, voice steady despite the chaos. It was designed for internal corruption. For the day when the Nexus itself becomes the threat. Elias felt the meaning hit him with physical force. Manual severance meant isolating the Nexus from the greater network. Cutting it off. Blinding it. It would stop the docking, he said. Yes. It would also collapse interstellar coordination, he realized. Trade. Diplomacy. Emergency response. Every world that depended on the Nexus would suddenly be alone. For how long? He asked. The Queen didn't answer immediately. Long enough for people to remember how to choose without being told, she said at last. The hostile structure shifted again, its internal light intensifying as it began synchronizing with the Nexus's outer layers. The station groaned, power bleeding toward the point of contact. We're out of time, Elias said. She nodded. The severance requires 2 anchors. One to initiate. One to hold. His breath caught. Hold what? The Queen met his eyes fully now, and there was no distance left between monarch and person. The narrative core, she said. When the cut happens, everything will try to rewrite itself at once. Panic, confusion, power vacuums. Someone has to stay inside the storm long enough to keep the lie from becoming the first truth people hear. Elias understood. He laughed softly, almost hysterically. Of course it was him. Of course the universe had escalated from sitting in the wrong seat to this. You're asking me to be loud, he said. I'm asking you to be human, she replied. The spire pulsed red. External synchronization at 40%, a systems officer shouted. We won't be able to stop. The Queen raised a hand, silencing them. Elias stepped closer to the spire, feeling its energy crawl across his skin. Data streams roared around him, raw and unfiltered. This was the heart of the Nexus, the place where meaning became momentum. If I do this, he said quietly, there's no guarantee I come back the same. She studied him, something like regret flickering across her features. Change is the cost of proximity, she said again. This time it was not a warning. The hostile structure pressed closer. The chamber lights dimmed as power was siphoned away. Somewhere, hull plating screamed. Elias placed his hand against the spire. The world exploded into sensation. Information slammed into him, not organized, not translated. Billions of voices, half-formed thoughts, fear, hope, rage, doubt. He felt worlds arguing with themselves, populations fracturing under the weight of uncertainty. And beneath it all, the invasive presence of the entity, cold, efficient, stripping nuance in favor of compliance. He understood its logic instantly. Choice was inefficient. Choice produced variance. Variance led to instability. Stability required control. No, Elias thought fiercely. Stability requires trust. He anchored himself to something simple. The memory of staying seated. Of holding a hand when leaving would have been easier. Of choosing presence over safety. The Queen's voice cut through the storm. Severance in 3. The entity reacted immediately, cognitive pressure spiking as it sensed resistance. It pushed harder, flooding Elias with visions of collapse. Worlds burning, alliances shattering, people begging for order at any cost. Elias opened his mouth and spoke, not as a broadcast, not as a command, but as a person caught in the same chaos as everyone else. I don't know what happens next, he said, letting the words ride the raw channels. I don't know if this works. I don't know if this is the right choice. The entity recoiled slightly. Uncertainty was not part of its design. But I do know this, Elias continued. If someone else decides for you, you don't get peace. You get quiet. And quiet is easy to mistake for safety until you realize you can't scream anymore. 1. The Queen's hand slammed down on the final control. The severance tore through the nexus like a thunderclap. Light vanished. Sound vanished. For a heartbeat that felt like eternity, Elias existed nowhere. Then everything came back wrong. Gravity lurched. Systems rebooted in fragments. The chamber filled with disoriented shouts as emergency lighting struggled to reassert itself. Outside the glass, the hostile structure screamed, not audibly but through violent distortion, its synchronization collapsing as the nexus tore itself free. The docking failed. The entity recoiled, dragged backward by forces it had not anticipated. Space warped violently, then snapped, flinging the structure away in a violent retreat that left scars in the stars themselves. It was gone. The nexus was silent. No overlays. No feeds. No omnipresent hum of connection. Just people. Elias sagged against the spire, lungs burning, vision swimming. He felt smaller somehow, stretched thin by what he had carried. The Queen reached him in seconds, catching him before he fell. For a moment, the world narrowed to her steady presence and the simple fact of being held upright. You stayed, she said softly. He tried to smile. I'm starting to think that's my thing. Around them, operators stared at dead screens, then at each other. Confusion rippled outward, but so did something else. Determination. The sudden, terrifying freedom of having to decide what came next without an answer fed directly into their minds. External status? The Queen demanded. A systems officer checked manual instruments, hands shaking. The nexus is isolated. No external control. No hostile presence. Relief washed through the chamber, quickly followed by unease. What now? Someone asked. The Queen looked around at them, all of them, and for the first time since Elias had met her, she did not project certainty. Now, she said, we live with the consequences of choosing. Elias straightened slowly, feeling the weight of what they had done settle into his bones. Worlds would panic. Systems would fracture. Some would curse her name. Some would curse his. But none of them would be silent. As emergency crews moved and plans began forming from scratch, Elias felt a strange sensation at the edge of his awareness. A residual echo from the storm he had stood in. Not gone. Watching. He turned toward the glass. Far out in the darkness, where the hostile structure had vanished, space shimmered once more. Something was still out there. And this time it was learning.